This will probably ruffle your feathers a little bit. I'm probably a Molinist. Here, let's get into it. So a little under a year ago, my friend Tim Stratton, author of this book here, did a debate with James White where he defended Molinism biblically. If you've never heard of Molinism, Molinism is effectively the doctrine that God has middle knowledge. Actually, according to Wikipedia, Molinism is the thesis that God has middle knowledge. According to my friend Tim, it is the thesis that God has middle knowledge and that humans possess libertarian free will. According to gotquestions.com, libertarian free will is basically the concept that metaphysically and morally, man is an autonomous being, one who operates independently, not controlled by others or outside forces. Effectively, libertarian free will is the idea that we actually are in control of our own actions, our own choices, and what we do. And so the fact that I'm making this video right now is something that I actually chose to do freely, not something that was predetermined. If I raise my hand, I'm doing that of my own accord, not because the laws of physics necessitated that was going to happen at that moment in time. Let's contrast that with determinism. Determinism is the doctrine that all events, including human action, are ultimately determined by causes external to the will. Some philosophers have taken determinism to imply that individual human beings have no free will and cannot be held morally responsible for any of their actions. Historically, the debate between Calvinism and Arminianism has always rested on the issue of human free will versus the sovereignty of God. Did God construct everything, and is God in control of everything, or do we actually have the ability to choose? And what does the data say? My friend Tim defends that both are actually true, and the only way to do that is by invoking the doctrine of middle knowledge. Kurt McGregor says it this way. He says that middle knowledge is God's knowledge of all things that would happen in every possible set of circumstances that an omnipotent God could create. The way that I think of that is I like to say that God knows the answer to every what if question. It's the answers to the questions of what would have happened if things were different. For example, God knows what would have happened throughout all of human history if instead of Moses being the one at the burning bush, it was you. God knows the consequences of all of that. And one other important detail here that Tim told me last month that I was just missing in this is that middle knowledge doesn't only say that God knows the answers to all of those what ifs. It goes further and says God knew the answers to all of those what ifs prior to the creation of the universe. So that's the doctrine of middle knowledge. In Tim's debate, he did something absolutely brilliant. And the reason that I'm making this video, in fact, is because not having watched the debate between Tim and Dr. James White, but because I had a conversation with Dr. Stratton last month where things all of a sudden clicked to me. I actually became an open-handed Molinist based on this very simple argument that Dr. Stratton puts forward in this clip here.
1. If Scripture implies both A, that humans occasionally possess libertarian freedom, and B, all human activity is predestined before creation, then Scripture implies Molinism. 2. Scripture implies both A and B. 3. Therefore, Scripture implies Molinism.
This is really the selling point of Molinism to me, where Arminians seem to take the source text of the Scriptures that exemplify human free will, and then Calvinists seem to take the source text from the Scriptures that exemplify God's sovereignty. Molinism is the only framework that actually accepts both, and it does that through the doctrine of middle knowledge, the idea that God knows every possible outcome to every possible what if. And something that's really beautiful about that, the reason that Molinism has resonated with me personally for years is because it makes God bigger. It's one thing to say that God knows everything that is happening and everything that will happen. It's a completely other thing. It's another magnitude of greatness to say that God knows the answer to every possible what if explicitly in perfect detail. And that's beautiful. And so why does that reconcile libertarian freedom with God's sovereignty? Simple. Because God picked the universe that he picked. He made the world that he chose to make with every particle in place precisely because he knew all possible outcomes based on those initial conditions and his interjections at specific points in time, such as the life of Christ. So God does everything knowing how in doing that, our free will lead to his end goals. So this marries God's sovereignty with our free will. We get to take our own actions and make our own choices And God picked the world that optimizes things at his goal and knows exactly how they're going to play out. So what Tim said in that clip that I just played for you, that simple syllogism, that if the scriptures defend both libertarian free will and determinism, then Molinism is true. 2, the scriptures defend both libertarian free will and determinism. Conclusion, Molinism is true. That was what put me over the edge. I've wanted to accept Molinism for years, but I haven't had sufficient evidence to say I could defend it. And that simple 3-step syllogism that Dr. Stratton put forward, that made it click. Yes, now I can say that I can defend Molinism. Some examples in scripture that point to each of these are on the wall behind me. You can see I got some verses here. Those verses point to determinism and to human free will. But let me make this very, very simple. Where does the scripture say that we have free will? In the 613 commandments that God gave us. If we didn't have a choice but to do as he determined us, he would have no need to give us laws. The fact that he gave us laws implies that we have the ability to obey and disobey, which means we have a choice. All we need in addition to say that Molinism is correct is to find at least one verse that shows that God has determined things. If you can find it anywhere where it says that God knows how things are going to play out, if you can find anywhere that says that God has placed us in the time and place, nations where they are, when they are, for his purposes, that's determinism. All we need is a single case study from the scriptures of each occurrence, and the result is necessarily Molinism. And that's brilliant. I mean, it's not hard to find examples in scriptures of God determining things or of people being given choices. And when we see both of those together, we realize, well, there's actually only one theological framework that even suggests that those two things are compatible, and that is the doctrine of middle knowledge. That's Molinism. And that's why I'm a Molinist. Hey, thanks so much for watching that video. I'm so grateful for people like you. The channel's growing. The last video that we put out, we saw like a 40% increase in our subscriber count, and that means so much to me. It tells me that we're on the right path. We're doing what we need to be doing. We're building God's kingdom. This ministry is doing exactly what it's been called to do, and that means a lot to me. I have one favor to ask of you, and that's for you to prayerfully consider supporting our ministry financially by partnering with us through Patreon. And then you'll get access to all the insider trainings that we're launching in January. And you can do that at any of the tiers that we have preset or a custom tier. Any amount helps, and everything that you do to help support us helps us to create more content like this. So prayerfully consider supporting us on Patreon, and I'll see you in there. Oh, and God bless. I love you so much. It means so much to me that you're here.